I want to thank Beth Ridgway for having me have this opportunity to condense my 60 years of making music for a living into about an hour and a half. Most of the time that I've spent in the last 3 weeks has been trying to cut my speech down and just hit the highlights, of what happened. So that's probably what I'm going to do, is just hit the highlights. And do you remember before they had the cell phones, and somebody would come over to your house and you'd just been on a trip, big vacation, what'd you do? You'd pull out all the pictures and start showing them to them and boring them to tears, Well, anyway, I brought my pictures of my journey. And I'm going to let you just pass them around. And you'll know, even though you're looking at them, there's a little explanation, but as I give the talk, then you're going to see what the picture is. The first one on there is a drawing of a thing called a creel. And when I was in graduate school, I got a patent, or the school got the patent, on this creel thing, and it was for industrial knitting, where it would improve the efficiency of a knitting machine by 10%. And I thought I was going to get rich, so 10%, and I'd worked over at Flag Utica in Florence in the summertime in the knitting department. If any of you, some of you people are going to remember these things, some people are not old enough, but so I was pretty excited about it. And then also, I'm going to pass these other things around. This is anyway, this is, believe it or not, this is me singing, "I'm Just Like a Prairie Flower." This is a wire, and you're going to see the picture of my grandfather's wire recorder. And when I was a World War II baby, you might imagine, since I graduated in 1960, and so the only person there to sing with my grandfather, who was a coal miner but a self-taught musician, who was into recording with wire recorders and eventually got a tape recorder. I used to have to, when we go visit my grandparents, I'd have to spend 2 days with my grandfather making records. And most of the stuff he played was Hawaiian or Hank Williams or, that kind of stuff. I just hated going there doing that because my voice hadn't changed, so I sounded like a little girl, And then he would take those, and I was starting to bring the acetate records, but he could make a record. He had a little machine that I gave my grandson that actually would cut grooves in the record, and you only play it a few times and then it'd be worn out. So I was exposed to recording at a real early age. So about 20 years ago, my granddaughter, when I lived in Colorado Springs, I'd bring one grandchild out at a time, focus on them for about a week, and I felt like that was the best thing to do. And I lived up in the mountains, and I had this big giant room up there, and I had gold records and platinum records and pictures of people that were famous at the time. And I couldn't wait to show my granddaughter. She was 10, and she's going to really be impressed with her granddaddy, right? That's what I'm thinking. And I had this one that just as you come in the door, and it had 6 platinum albums that was on Alabama. And I'm waiting for her to come in. I come in, and to give you some idea, that's the size of one, right? For those who don't know what that is, that's a vinyl album. And she looked at it and she said, "Granddaddy, I didn't know they made CDs that big." And all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh God, I'm really old. So David Hood and Larry Hamby, who's here tonight, all of the Mystics are still alive and well. Billy Bradford and David Hood and I formed a group when we were freshmen over at UNA. And we called it the Mystics. And we went in on one Sunday morning at Fame Recording Studios, which hadn't been open very long, but I thought, hey, this is a real recording studio. And we gave Rick Hall $250, and we got 545 records. And what was funny is we didn't think, Billy and I were down at Auburn, Larry and David were over at UNA, and we forgot we had to have a B-side, right? So Larry and I wrote a song on the way to the studio called "I Could Cry," and that was our B-side. And I remember always singing at my grandfather's place. I did not like the way I sounded, right? But Rick Hall had a microphone that made you sound almost like God. I mean, it was just wonderful. And I'm listening to myself coming back on those big speakers and stuff, and I'm thinking, hey, that sounds pretty good. But here was what was hard that most people don't know. And the reason I handed out this handout about musicians and producers and all that, back then, Rick Hall had the pressure on him. And here's why. When you made records back then, everything was monaural, meaning there is no stereo, and everybody that's going to be on that record has to be in that studio, and they have to play their part, and the singers have to sing, and Rick has to get it mixed just exactly right and fade it out at the end, because that's how you made records. Go in, record them, and the problem was the singers would get tired if you didn't get it right. If one person messed up, he had to start over. So Ronnie Eads, who's here, will tell you, because the horn players are there too, right? That's hard to get everybody not to play it all the way through, have it blended properly, and nobody make a mistake. But that's how they made the records. The early records that Rick Hall did were like that. And so was ours. So we got in our car, we go to radio stations, and back then you could do that, and you go in and say, would you play the record, what do you think? They'd play it, the phones would light up, and we had a regional hit. We got to make $400 a night playing for fraternity parties and high school dances. So I thought to myself, something's wrong here. Because I heard that these musicians that are playing in these places around here getting $60 to $100 a night each. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know. And I said, we were making that much in 1962, 63. So I looked it up, and I said, what is $1 worth in the 60s versus what's it worth today? $1 is equivalent to $10 today. So what we were really making, instead of $400 today's money, we were making $4,000. But the worst part is, reverse that. If musicians are only making $100 a night, divided by 10, they're making $10 a night in today's equivalent money. I paid my way through Auburn playing in the band. We played almost every weekend somewhere, some university, some high school, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and it's cash money. I mean, I'm sure it's okay to say now I didn't pay any taxes on it. So during that time, I was a songwriter and artist for Rick Hall, and he produced a couple, 3 records on me. A couple of them were chart records, nothing particularly big. And while I was in school, I got to play with or open act for B.J. Thomas, Percy Sledge, Neil Diamond, Jackie Wilson, Ray Stevens, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, and Johnny Rivers. And what I realized then, I don't think I want to do this. It was just, I remember being backstage with Jackie Wilson, and he had his shirt off, and he had cuts all over his chest. And a really nice person, right? And he's telling me I was playing at the University of Virginia College. We were playing at the Coliseum. And then I played at the Grand Ole Opry on the Toys for Tots. And one of my artists, I'm not going to tell you his name, I idolized this guy. He was so good, right? Had a lot of hits. And before he went on, he killed a half a pint. And my whole thing was, they're pushing it so hard, I don't think I want to do this. It's a good thing, because I don't think I was going to have any hits anyway, but So here I'm in South Carolina, and I get this phone call from Jimmy Johnson. He says, we just bought a recording studio, and we want you to come and start and run a publishing company and production, help us in the production, but we don't have any money. Great. I got a new little baby too, and a really good job working for a baby products manufacturer that made 50 million dozen diapers a year and baby sleepers, right? So I said, well, maybe you could get Jerry Wexler to put up half the money for the demos, because I got to have money to cut demos, and half of my salary, which was $200 a week. Now don't multiply that one by 10, okay? Because it didn't feel like $2,000 a week even back then. But he said, okay, so Jerry Wexler said, good. He didn't really know me. I didn't know him, but I knew he was powerful. He's the vice president of Atlantic Records. If he brings recording artists in, they're going to get promoted, and your odds of getting a hit are really good. And so I figured if I had a publishing company right there that the musicians and I owned together, we got a good chance of getting a hit, or at least getting it recorded. You have nothing to do with getting a hit, at that point. And so I called Frances Preston at BMI, and I said, my name is Terry Woodford, and blah, 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 blah. She came down, she gave me $5,000 to start that publishing company as an advance. Any writer that I wanted an advance for, she said, how much? And I'd tell her, she'd give it to them. I was offered a lot of times to go with ASCAP after I got hits. No way. I come back and how am I going to judge people's songs? I like it, I don't like it, it's just my opinion. So I decided there's got to be something these songs, these hits have in common. Country, R&B, top 40. So I studied them. I'm an engineer, really. That's what I came from. So I'm going to reverse engineer these hit songs. And I found all these things that the hits had in common. In particular, the title. The title is the most important part of a song. It's the summary of the object. It says everything. It's what you're going to remember because it's going to stick out melodically or lyrically, so you'll know what to buy as the listener, because they're not going to tell you on the radio station. Not back then. They didn't tell you who the artist was and the name of the song, And then person, first person. Why? So that the listener becomes the I. The singer is representing what the listeners want to hear. He's helping them express their feelings. So most all the hits were first person. And then tense changes. You don't have tense changes. And then there was 5 different constructions of songs, and the title was in the chords twice, and blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on. So now I've got a plan, if I get any writers, which I didn't have any at the time, except me. And there was a guy over at the Times Daily, and he was the sports writer, and his name was Al Cederholm. I'll never forget it. And I feel a little embarrassed because I've told this story several times, and I found out he's still alive living in North Carolina. He may not like what I say. And he comes over and he said, I want to be a songwriter. And I figured, I haven't got any songwriters. He's a sports writer. So he has the command of the English language, right? So I said, well, Al, I'm going to teach you all these things that I picked up on songs, and I can tell you why. I'm not just making observations. I know why each one of these things work. And if you'll do that in your songs, we got a better chance of getting it recorded, and Jerry Wexler's come in. So he leaves, and about 3 weeks later he comes back and he said, I got one. And I'm excited, kind of. I don't know for sure. He said the name of it is Love is the Tie That Binds. Now I'm thinking, well, that's an old saying, but how in the world is he going to write that? I don't know. He plays the song, and everything I told him was in that song. He did it exactly like I told him. It was probably the worst song I'd ever heard. It was during the Vietnam War, and he's talking about young men coming home with wooden boxes, and I was, oh God. I said, Al, people don't want to hear that. I forgot to tell him, you also have to test your song by who cares, Yeah. And so he said, look, you told me that if I would follow what you said, that we would have a better chance of getting our song cut. I want to play this for Jerry Wexler. And I'm going, oh man. I had not played any songs for Jerry Wexler at this point, and he's paying half the money, and he's the power guy, right? I don't know why I let Al play that song for Jerry Wexler. I fought back many times, and I think what I thought, well, if Jerry Wexler tells him it sucks, then he'll know it sucks when I tell him it sucks, Anyway, so he goes in, we're in the front office up there, and he's playing the song, and Jerry Wexler was so nice and so cordial. He gets about halfway through the song, and he says, I'm sorry, that's not for my artist. Now, Al Cederholm never submitted another song to me again. I think, personally, he was devastated. But the worst part was, about 5 days later, Roger Hawkins gets a phone call from Jerry Wexler. He says, I think you made a mistake. That's me, the mistake. He thinks I don't know. And I'm like, I've been working, 16 hours a day at night, trying to get this thing off the ground. And George Soule, a guy from Meridian, Mississippi, came up here, and we were writing songs together at my house till 1 or 2 in the morning. So, what could I do? Well, I got a local artist to make a picture or a drawing of this creature, and the creature had its finger up its nose. And the name of it was Pick a Winner, right? And I put the Pick a Winner stickers, which are red and black, on my tape boxes, and I was sending them all over the country, right? So a couple of weeks later, Jerry Wexler calls Roger Hawkins again. Roger, come and tell me this, right? He said, Jerry Wexler got your last 6 songs. He's cutting 4 of them. And one of them was on Lulu, who just had a big hit called To Sir With Love. George Soule and I were elated. We also thought we're going to be rich. And we did get the single, but she had there's always something to mess up a hit record. I think she had a row with the label or something. It was big in Australia. That's where she was from. And so then we got cuts on Solomon Burke and Archie Bell and the Drells and Bobby Womack and Joe Tex and Mavis Staples and Bonnie Bramlett. And so we were rolling. We were getting songs cut. And then the Rolling Stones came in. And you probably, I don't know whether you've seen those pictures yet or not, but now that was a trip, I gotta tell you. In the daytime, R.B. Greaves cut Take a Letter Maria with the studio musicians, but it was just Jimmy Johnson and Larry Hamby back there and me with the Rolling Stones. And I look so straight, if you see the picture of these little wire rim glasses like John Lennon, and a sport coat and short hair. And I knew they were doing the movie. I'm gonna get in this movie, right? And I figured the way to get in the movie is you stick with Mick Jagger. He's gonna be in the movie, for sure, whether the other ones are or not. So that's why you'll see, if you ever see some of the pictures, I'm right there back at the back. I'm not doing anything, because really what my job was is to warn them if the police were coming. I told that out in Colorado Springs and they wouldn't believe me. They said, oh, we know you had something to do with that. I said, no, I didn't. Anyway, when I go through Muscle Shoals Sound, I hear stories that I know are not true. They did not come in a Learjet, if you've heard that. They came in a Super G Constellation with 27 guitars, and they rented the whole west wing of the Holiday Inn, and nobody even paid attention to them except one person. I've tried to find her since I got back. But you'll see Mick Jagger and their bodyguard and myself and another one on the back porch of Muscle Shoals Sound. That was the day they were leaving. I was helping carry out the 27 guitars to get in the movie, right? I still didn't think I'd got in it yet. And there's this 16-year-old girl standing out there in that gravel parking lot with her camera. And her name was Wendy Van Pelt. And I think her daddy taught at the university, and also a photographer. And Mick Jagger sees her out there, and they've had nobody bother them. That's for the Rolling Stones. Just, they couldn't record anywhere else in the U.S. and be able to do that. And here's this one little 16-year-old girl. Mick Jagger jumps off that porch, walks up to Wendy, and puts his arm around her. And he says, thank you for coming. Now, she has never forgotten that. Then in 1972, George left to go to Fame, and I left Muscle Shoals Sound and met with Clayton Ivey, who was a studio player, keyboard player over at Fame. And my contribution, if you've read any of this stuff that I hand out, the reason I handed these out, I don't think the public here knows what the roles were that people played on making records. And I think one of the roles that's most important, if you noticed it, how many get royalties and how many don't. Now, if I'm gonna be in the music business and I'm gonna leave the textile industry, I mean, it's a good thing I did, because it's dead, but is how do you make money? You make it with royalties. It's unlimited. It's based on how well you do, right? I like that idea. I could see the future for me in textiles. It might take 10 years. Of course, I thought I was going to be the president of the division in 10 years, which I would never have. But when you're young, you're cocky. And so I realized that the way to make money, and if you'll notice, the producer does it all. He's in charge of everything, and he gets royalties. And he can be a musician, he can be an engineer, he can be one of the other roles or more than one of the other roles, and that's just all that much better because the producer doesn't have to hire him, he's it. And if he's a songwriter, that's good because he's going to make songwriting royalties on the ones he writes. If he's a publisher, that's going to be good because he's going to make the same thing that all his songwriters make, and himself. So, Clayton, unbelievable keyboard player. Unbelievable how he could work with musicians. Ronnie will tell you, he's a genius keyboard player. You could give him a song and he could play it in 10 different genres, just like that, with his little number chart. That's how good he was. I'm glad he's not here.
I was hoping you would be.
I didn't figure you would. So we went to the bank, Central Bank, which is now a recording studio. That's kind of ironic. And we borrowed $5,000. And what we would do back then is, okay, we know where you get the money. Producers, songwriters, and publishing, right? That's where the money comes. So we're going to be producers, which also can be the ones that put up the money for the project. So we borrowed the money, we'd find a singer, and we'd put up the money to record four songs. And we'd pay everybody. And then my job, see, the thing I brought to the production deal was I was a songwriter, I was a music publisher, I was an engineer, I was an okay singer, and more importantly, I had the company contacts, the record company contacts. They knew who I was, and I knew who they were. So I could go pitch out in California or New York, and our first 10 months in 1972 money, we grossed $100,000, which would be $800,000 in today's money, and we didn't get a hit. The irony is you don't have to get a hit. All you got to do is get a deal with a record company that's going to distribute your product. And we got one on everything we speculated on. Now, so then here comes along a guy named Reuben Howell. He was a white guy, and we've been doing R&B stuff primarily, from Picayune, Mississippi. And he could sing, right? So we speculated on Reuben. Now, at the same time, Motown moves from Detroit to Los Angeles. And they had lost the best songwriting team probably in the world is Holland, Dozier, and Holland, who wrote all the Four Tops hits, the Preves hits, produced them. They were just unbelievable. So somebody, my lawyer, who was a guy named Dave Berman, says, you ought to pitch to Motown. I think, a white artist to Motown. You know what I mean? They may have had somebody corrected me the other day and said they had some guy back, and I'm thinking, I never had pitched to Motown. They were in Detroit. I'm not going to make a trip to Detroit for one record company. I could hit them all in California or New York, right? So I called up and got an appointment, go in there, and they bought it. They leased that album, and I am just elated. Do you know what I mean? I got an album on Motown, and the guy is a white guy, right? So that led to something really cool. They liked what we did, and they decided they wanted us as exclusive record producers and songwriters. Now, you talk about excited. I mean, come on, the Temptations, the Commodore, these people, that's the music I grew up on. And I'm going to get a chance to produce them and write songs for them. The thing about our first project, which was Thelma Houston. Thelma Houston was a killer singer. She was really good, really good. She could do one-take vocals, back to back, and they'd all be good and different. So we produced a record on her that I like the way you said, you've been doing wrong for so long. It just comes natural when you did that intro. You said it with feeling. And so we recorded that on her. And Frank Johnson and I wrote that. You'll see Frank's picture in there with Clayton and I. And Billie Jean Brown, who had been with Motown since the beginning when they were in Detroit, we were protected by Billie Jean Brown. She guided us through what to do and, you know, what not to do and that kind of thing. And it wasn't hard to spot Clayton and I at Motown, okay? We're the only white guys there, so they knew who those boys were from Alabama. So Billie Jean said, I think it's a hit, we got to take it to Barry. And I think, oh God, we're going to meet Berry Gordy. Right? And this is a big deal. Berry Gordy was the most successful black company owner in the United States for years. And he was a hit songwriter and producer. I mean, everything, you know, that you could want. And this is Berry, we're working for Berry Gordy. In fact, they used to call us Berry's black producers trapped in white bodies. Now, one thing else I learned about Berry Gordy was when you're in the building, in meeting in the office, it's strictly serious. He and Smokey Robinson taught Clayton and I a lot of stuff in those meetings. But when you had the meetings at his house, it was a spectacle. So our first meeting was on this Thelma Houston record, and we go, and it's the one in Malibu. Now, we go to, you got to keep in mind, I'm a textile engineer. Still, you know, this is all new stuff for me. This is, and out there in Hollywood, it is really crazy. And so we go to his house, and Billy D. Williams meets us at the door, if you remember him, right? Big star. And we're guided through his house, which has these big Greek columns, right? And we come around the curve, and we see Barry sitting in the living room, which is the whole back of the house is glass looking at the ocean. And he's sitting on a throne, a real throne. And he's got these two guys beside him fanning him with these big feather-looking things, right? And I'm thinking, you don't know what to think. You just don't say a word. So, and Barry has a real high voice also, right? Oh, let's hear what you got. So Billie Jean plays the record, and he is critiquing it as it plays. And I'm thinking, oh, come on. You know, I had to critique people's songs, right? But not as it plays. You ought to do this. And I'm going, but again, this guy's a hit record producer. He owns the biggest record company. And, you know, it goes on, and he pays my money. Now, one thing I forgot to tell you about, they gave us so much money in the beginning, you know, that I didn't know what to do. I'm not a business person, you know, but I did know that you could buy company cars. I told Clayton, I said, we ought to get a company car. He said, yeah. I said, well, what do you want? He said, how about a Corvette? And I said, well, we could look successful whether we are or not. You know, we'll buy Corvettes. So I go over here to Gene Crump Chevrolet. Now, if you notice in that picture where we're in front of Motown over there where the dentist is now, we had long hair, and Clayton had a beard by then. And I go over there, and no one would wait on me for about 20 minutes. Nobody would wait on me, you know, the long hair, he's having money. So finally, there was a guy that used to work at Miley Buick that my dad bought cars from, and he recognized me. He said, Terry, is that you? And I said, yep. He said, what can I do for you? I said, well, I'd like to have 2 Corvettes, hardtop convertibles, cash, and no trade-in. I said, what do you got? He said, well, I got an orange one here and a silver one on the way. I said, well, let me call Clayton and see what he wants. Clayton said he wanted a silver one, so I took the orange one. How much do you think the Corvettes were back then? Got any idea? $7,450. And I gave him $7,150 and thought I made a deal. So that picture you see with the 2 Corvettes out there, that's the Corvettes and the one you like. So anyway, back to the Motown thing. So he's critiquing it, and he says, you know what? He said, I think you need to change the background singers. And I'm thinking, is that going to get him to get behind it? I'll change anything he wants. Right? I'm not going to say a word. I think they're fine, but, you know, so what? What do I matter? I don't. You don't know. I don't care who you are. You don't know a hit record for sure until it's a hit record. It's your opinion, right? So I go back. Clayton goes home. Clayton didn't like going out there. I thought about telling the story in Clayton, and I'm going to tell it just since he didn't show. He did not like going to California. It was not his element. He's a North Florida guy, right? And a golfer, killer golfer. And so Clayton, I said, we got to go out to California. He said, I can't go. He said, I'm doing a session over at Muscle Sound and Gladys Knight and the Pips. Well, what am I going to say? Do it. Okay, I'll go by myself. So I'm going, I get out at the Los Angeles airport, and I'm going down La Cienega because you could go all the way to Hollywood that way instead of taking the interstate. And I see this gigantic billboard, Gladys Knight and the Pips at the Hollywood Bowl. They weren't recording Muscle Shoals at the time. I called him up and said, oh, did you do the Gladys Knight session? Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
Anyway, so anything not to be out there, he didn't like it too much. So I get the background singers. I'm having to get California background singers. I don't know anybody out there. I get the most expensive one, Gloria Jones, right? And her crew. So I go and do this thing, and then I have to remix everything. So it's time to go back to Barry's. Billie Jean says, let me tell you something. What you're about to see, if you ever say anything about it, I'm going to tone down what she said. You'll be in trouble. And I don't know what she's talking about, but she's the go-to. She protects us. She guides us, So we go in. This time we go in. Barry still got the throne with the two guys. Billy D. Williams didn't beat us this time. And she plays the record. And it's weird. It's the same record we brought the first time. He said, that's just what I wanted. And I thought, I'm not saying a word. Because I don't know whether he's putting us to the test or whether he's just messing with these boys from the South. The next little Motown story, which I think is worth telling, is right across from Billie Jean's office was Stevie Wonder's office. And Stevie, we got to know him pretty well. Not anybody would get around Stevie. They were intimidated by him, but I just wasn't, and neither was Clayton, because he was really a nice person, and talented. Oh my God, it was just unbelievable, So he's getting ready to play his album for the whole sales department, A&R people, and his manager, who was also the president of Motown, Abner, right? Now Abner is sitting there, and nobody hears Stevie's stuff until it is finished, and here it is, and the millions of dollars that album's going to bring in, everybody's supposed to listen. And so they're about 2 or 3 songs into the album, and evidently Abner got a phone call and tiptoes out to take it. The one thing I learned about Stevie Wonder, which I suspect is true, I never asked him, but I think he knew who you were by the sound of your walk, particularly if you were around him enough. So then Abner sneaks back in. Stevie says, what'd you think? Oh, it's great, Stevie, it's great. Stevie Wonder disappeared for 2 weeks. Nobody knew where he was. Abner is totally freaked out, right? Where is he? He's mad, that's where he is, So next thing I know, after a couple of weeks, we're up there in Billie Jean's office, and Stevie comes in. Shut the door. He said, no, when I point to you and Clayton, I want you to sing, buy Stevie a Rose. Buy Stevie a Rose. I'll point to you. So he calls Abner on the phone. He gets him on the phone. He's singing this song about how Abner did him wrong. And then he'd point to us and we go, bye Stevie a Rose. Do these more songs. And he does the whole song and we're doing, bye Stevie a Rose. And then Stevie Wonder goes, pop, hangs up. Abner didn't have any idea where he was. Next morning, there's a Rolls Royce at Stevie Wonder's house. I bet nobody knows that story. They do now, probably, if we've got it videoed. So I'm going to tell you another Berry Gordy story because it's only half of the story. I can't go into all the detail. But you talking about messing with people. He loved to do that. I knew now what to expect, anything, right? So we're in the studio with the Temptations doing vocals. We get this phone call. Berry Gordy wants you at the Bel Air house with songs for Jermaine and Diana Ross. So, we're scrambling. And I was on what I called my protest trip. Because sometimes you'd be out there and they just don't have you doing anything. What a waste of time, and start renting a Pinto, right? So we pull up to the gates of the Bel Air house. They're big iron gates, and 2 guys are out there with machine guns. That's a little intimidating, right? So we drive up the hill, and here's these Rolls Royces and all this stuff up there. And this is Red Skelton's old home. And Barry Gordy spent $3 million just remodeling it. I forget to look out over here to my right. So we go in, and everybody there from the A&R department have these, remember those little tape recorders that had little things you could push and had a little microphone on it and a speaker? They were only about $30. Everybody had one there, except us. I'm thinking, I don't need a tape recorder. This is the boss. This is the man, right? I'm going to remember everything he says. So I didn't have a tape recorder. Now, what I didn't know, which I found out later, it's not for you to remember everything he says. It's for him to know what he said if he tells you to do something different than what he told you to do in the meeting. So I learned then to take my little tape recorder. Some other things happened, which I'll skip over. And really what this thing was about, I think, was he was going to entertain Clayton and I and put us to another test. He cleared the room. Kids, all the A&R people, everybody out, and he opens up this other room, and it's this immaculate dining area for 4 people, right? And so we go in there, and I sit down, and Clayton's on my right, Barry Gordy's straight across, and there's this guy who I learned to not like on the left. And I'm looking down at the place setting. There are 5 forks. I'm in trouble. I can figure 3. And I figure Clayton can figure 2. East and North Florida. And so I don't know what to do, except I'm going to watch Barry, right? And we had about 3 or 4 different glasses, different kinds. I figured one's for wine, although there wasn't any wine served and things. And so I'm going to watch Barry and do whatever he does, right? Out comes Chinese waiters, right? And they're bringing fried okra, beef stew with potatoes and carrots, right? Corn, and what was the other thing? Can't remember the other one, a southern dish, right? This was for us, right? Southern meal. Barry's sitting there and I'm watching him, Clayton's watching him, we're watching each other. Because we can communicate with our eyes after we've been together so long. So Barry takes his napkin, he tucks it under his chin, and he picks up that okra with his hand and puts it in his mouth. And I'm looking at Clayton. Clayton takes the napkin, and I take my napkin, and we put it in the neck, and we pick up that okra with our hands, and we ate that whole damn meal with our hands. So then we went outside in the back. Now, when you get in the back, I mean, he could see the whole skyline of Los Angeles. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And he had these big, long kind of water troughs that were about 3 feet deep and had these white Japanese carp, big carps in there, and they were just going all around. And he comes over to me, he says, you know what? You know, and I don't know what, you know, I'm always afraid, I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? He said, you don't know how lucky you are. He said, I don't get to be creative anymore. I've got a board of governors I have to answer to. Now, this is a guy who wrote a lot of hits, right? I didn't know what he meant at that time until later, when I had a bunch of songwriters who always want you to get their songs cut and all this other stuff. You don't have, only time I could write them was at 2 a.m. So I was going to not tell this Stevie Wonder story, but the guy from Universal in New York said, I want as many Motown stories as you can tell. I said, I can tell you too many, but I'm going to tell this one because this is a fun one for us. Back then, they came out with a synthesizer. First one, $70,000. Stevie Wonder buys it. Now multiply, 7, 8 times, that's $560,000. Stevie Wonder, that's nothing, right? And he's in there messing with it. And had little plugs that he plugged in. I mean, it was nothing like a keyboard or all that. Just little things and make weird noises and stuff. And so I just knocked on the door. I said, could you keep it down in there? Right? So he heard that. He said, Woodford Ivy says, get in here now. so we go in there and he's showing us how the thing works and stuff. And he plays us a song called Mary Jane, which is, it never came out. It was no doubt a hit record. And I said, God, that's a hit record. I'm not, no hype. I'm not hyping him. He said, I'm not putting that out. I'm trying to expand my demographics. Right? Whether you know what that means. He wanted to pick up people that weren't already his fans, right? But spread out a little more in his music. So I said, Stevie, I don't know why I said it. You know how you just say things sometimes off the top of your head and you say, why did I say that? I said, Stevie, someday you're going to beg Clayton and I to produce you. Like he needed us, you know. He didn't say a word. And so Clayton and I leave, and about 3 weeks later, we come back, and coming down the hall, and he knew who we were. He knew those little footsteps. He said, Woodford Ivy, come in here now. So we go in. He said, you know, I thought of what you said about you producing me. And I'm going, he said, and I wrote a song, especially for you and Clayton to produce for me. And I'm looking at Clayton like, I mean, just get on the album. You know what I mean? See, what most people don't know is no matter which song you had on the album, you get paid the same thing for the sales. So you don't have to have the hit single. If you get on Stevie Wonder's album, multiply it out. I mean, it's just, you know, it's lots of money. So he said, let's go across the hall where there's a piano across the hall. He had one in there, but he sits down and I'm all ears. You know, we're going to get to produce Stevie Wonder. It's just unbelievable. I can't believe I said it. I was so glad I had. So he starts playing, and he'd always do this. He's always rocking and smiling. Always rocking and smiling. He'd play the piano and do the same thing, right? He starts playing one of the most awful sounding, worse than country. It was just twangy, terrible lyrics, and just singing and smiling. He did the whole song. And he looks over and he says, what do you think? I said, pass. We walked out. But now when I think about it, Stevie Wonder actually wrote a song for Clayton and I to produce on him, and we turned him down. Well, towards the end of 1975, it got rough, and then that was the time when I realized that all the young people that were wanting to go in the music business were being taken advantage of by people who knew the music industry, because there was no school for it at the time. And it was a shame. I mean, really creative people, and somebody could sign them to a songwriting contract and not give them a penny, and they're tied up, and gave away half of the income of that song. I mean, I could go on and on of the ways you could rip them off. So I got with UNA people in a group out of Nashville, and we got the first 4-year degree program in the U.S. started, and I came up with the different courses: music publishing, music production, recording studios, retail sales. You know, I taught the commercial music business courses, but they made all those students take music theory, like the music education majors, right? Which I wouldn't have been able to pass any of them, but I'm just doing I'm doing mine at night, 3-hour classes, right? For me, I really liked that. You know, I really liked it. I was a smoker at the time. I had a stool much like this and an ashtray beside me, and the students would count the cigarettes I smoked in a 3-hour period. It must have been bad. I was a chain smoker. So we had guest speakers like Glenn Fry, Herman's Hermits, Peter Noon of Herman's Hermits, Jerry Wexler Hot. So we had, whenever the artists were in town recording, they would come over and speak to the students because they didn't need a school like that anywhere. It was a treat for them, I think. Glenn Fry was the most amazing speaker. I mean, he told it like it was, you know. So some of my students, I thought, in case anybody watches the video, I know I'm leaving some of them out, but some of them you know maybe: Walt Aldridge, Marcus Hall, Randy Poe. Randy Poe is the president of the largest independent music publishing company in the world, Lieber and Stoller, who wrote so many hits. Nancy Lee Brown, who's a business manager in Nashville. John Briggs, who was the vice president of ASCAP for a long while. And where did he go? Coy Fulmer, big gospel writer. Richard Butler had a lot of hits. Marcus Hall, which is Rick Hall's son, and CEO of Fame Publishing. Eddie Martin, Martin Armour, Eddie Alexander, Milton Sledge, and Kevin Lamb, and many more. One of the most successful ones, which I get to have, if I have time at the end, I'll tell you, is a guy named Tony Edwards, who just moved up here about 6 months ago. His story is unbelievable. And he passed away just out of nowhere, Saturday. So, in 1975, late 1975, we're not getting any hit singles. We're getting on albums. We had a gold album on the Supremes, on the Temptations, 2 on the Temptations, 1 on the Commodores, and 1 on Thelma Houston. But they want hit singles, and first you got to get the single to get it to be a hit. So it's hard, and you're competing. We would cut 4 songs, and 4 other producers would cut 4 songs each, and then they would pick from the ones they want to go on the album. Now, that was a new thing for us. We're having to compete head on head, with these big time record producers. So they decided they didn't want us anymore, but they'd give us $25,000 if we get out of our deal, which is okay with me. Multiply 25,000 times 8, right? So with that $25,000, we went to the bank again, and we decided we're going to build a recording studio. And we're going to build it. We bought this land across from the airport. We realized the airport could be a problem, but that wasn't that much activity going on there. And most of the recording went on in the evenings anyway. And we knew what time the DC-9 came in, and there were 2 of them, and we'd just shut down while it's time for them. I was coming along Avalon, and there was this company out there that made this underground sewer pipe, right? Now, I remember over at Rick's, he had this room, and they had them out of Capitol, and they would take a cinder block room, and they'd take plaster, and they'd plaster all the walls, and they'd plaster all the angles out of the walls, and then they would put a microphone or speaker down there, and have a microphone down there. Have you ever gone in a house that's empty, and the echo, how good it sounds, or in your bathroom shower where you got the acoustical tile? Those were called echo chambers. It's before they had electronic echo. So I'm looking at, I see this big gigantic sewer pipe, and we don't want any parallel walls. That's why they plaster everything. If it's parallel walls, it'll cancel. The sound will cancel. So I got out of the car, I got inside of it, and I said, "Ooh, it's making echo," and the ends were open, right? I had a fraternity brother from Auburn whose daddy made underground gasoline tanks. And I called him up and I said, "What's the biggest underground gasoline tank you make?" He said, 13,000 gallons. I said, "Could you make me one and bulge out the ends, and it's going to be round?" And he said, "Sure." And it was 13 feet long and 8.5 or 9 feet in diameter. And he had and on the top we had a manhole so you could go down in there. So when we first got it in and buried it underground, because the airplanes had screwed up. So the police came out. The police had free reign of our studio at all times, and they took advantage of it when the stars came in, right? They'd always be out there for something. And so they came out and they shot their gun over that manhole, and we timed it with a stopwatch, and it echoed or decayed for 13 seconds. That is a long time. So we had a unique sound with our echo chamber. Before that, we were using David Johnson's studio at Broadway. And then we'd also made a deal when we were with Motown with Ronnie Blue. Now, Ronnie Blue had a widget. And the deal was with Ronnie is that, "Hey, Ronnie, we'll give you $1,500 a month if we can come in every day that we want after 10 o'clock at night." He wasn't recording that late, so it paid his monthly amount, right? It was hard on home life if you're going in, and you got to get musicians willing to come in if you're doing tracks and stuff for demos or whatever you're using it for. But that's how we could really speculate cheaply, because keep in mind, studio time back then in those dollars was $1 to $2 a minute, which would be today $8 to $16 a minute. Just to rewind the thing could cost you $10. It's crazy. And studio time, when you speculated, was sometimes 40 to 50% of the total cost of your album. So if you own the studio and you're producing the records and you have the publishing, and forget whether you wrote it or not, and you get a $100,000 budget to produce an album from a record company, or you speculated on it, you're doing all right, whether you get hits or not. Now you got to get a hit every once in a while, and nobody's going to hire you. But they know as well as we did, I don't know what makes them hit. Somebody up there decides to get behind it and spend the money. Because once a record got in the top 40, it cost those record companies $500,000 to get it up to the top 5. So they're not going to do it unless they really think it's a hit. The first year, which was 1976, we rented the studio out. We didn't rent it out much. We're using it mainly for our own productions and for our songwriters, which I believe was the most important thing. You got to have hit songs to be a producer. So nobody's going to bring you hit songs from other publishing companies if you're not a hit record producer. They want hits from their songs. So the first people to rent our studio was a guy named Pete Carr and Lenny LeBlanc. And their first record was Falling. So we rented it out. The first year, we got a hit. Then Clayton and I found, through a guy named Ed Sherman out in California, a girl trio, and they called them Hot. And it was Juanita Curel and Kathy Carson and Gwen Owens. Now, we knew Gwen Owens because we produced some stuff for her before. And we recorded a song that Clayton and I and Tommy Brasfield wrote called The Angel in Your Arms. And like he told you in the intro, that held the record for being in the top 100 longer than any other single for 13 years. It was on the charts for over 6 months. Back then, they never lasted more than 3 months, and then it's on to the next record, right? So then, 8 years later, Barbara Mandrell recorded it country. So by that time, it became what was called a million performance song. And a million performance song, if you're with BMI, which I was a BMI writer, and they're the ones that collect the money from the radio stations and pay you. It's if you played that single back to back, 24 hours a day for 7.5 years, that's a million performances. That's something. That's a lot. So you also make more money per play after it becomes a million performance. Then, and this needs to be told because I've heard 5 different versions of how Mac McAnally was discovered. I'm going to tell you how it really was because we're the ones that discovered him. A guy named Steve Moore was my engineer. And Steve Moore pestered me for 3 months. He said, there's this kid from Mississippi and he's just really good. I'm too busy. I mean, come on, we're making hits. It's just The Angel in Your Arms. You know, all this stuff is happening in this year, 76 and 77. Finally, Steve booked him on a demo. After the demo's over, said, it's okay, you can listen to him now. Well, now I'm trapped, right? So he sits down in the control room. He's 19 years old at the time, I think. I know he wasn't any older than that because I had to get him court approved in Mississippi because he wasn't old enough to sign a contract. I heard all the songs that he had on his first album. I just couldn't believe it. He wrote all those when he was 15. It's a crazy world. I mean, all these songs, and I had him play them over and over. I kept him there till about 3 in the morning playing me those songs. And we signed him. I had to go to Mississippi, and we cut his first album. And I think when you go get some of the food back here, you'll see the first 4 albums that we produced on him. I was his personal manager. I never charged him any money to be his personal manager. And we were his publisher. He and Donnie Lowry, and Donnie Lowry was an ichthyologist out at TVA. They wrote Old Flame, which was #1 on Alabama, which was nice for us. Remember, publisher gets the same amount as songwriters do. So then we did another one that I think is worth telling the story on. We had a chance to produce Wayne Newton. Now I figured the odds of getting a hit on Wayne Newton are not too good because he's Mr. Las Vegas. He was the king of Las Vegas. And so one time I'm out in Los Angeles and his manager, who was named Jay Stream, who was an independent, at one time he owned 6 banks and he owned the Cessna dealership in San Luis Obispo and that was his manager. They never had a contract. Wayne had approached him to be his manager because they had Arabian horses in common. So Jay Stream says, meet me in San Luis Obispo. We're going to fly over to Las Vegas and I forget, meet with Wayne about something. So, okay. Now, Cessna is the only jet at the time that you didn't have to have a co-pilot. There's a co-pilot seat, which I got to sit in, right? But you don't have to have one. And of course, he was an older guy. That kind of worried me a little bit, you know. I don't know why, but it just, you know, it was also sitting a little intimidating, sitting in the front of a jet. It was quite a thrill. And he says, now, we're getting ready to go over a place that we're not supposed to go over. Don't be worried if these fighter jets come up. Keep in mind now, this is show business. These people are absolutely crazy, in my opinion, a lot of them. And so I'm thinking, he shuts the radio off on the plane. He's going over Area 51 to get to Las Vegas. And I didn't see any fighter jets come up. He seemed to think they knew him. I don't know. And as we're coming into Las Vegas, you see these airplanes coming up this way. So, and then he has this limo meet us at the airport, and we go in, and he tells me the story of how Wayne Newton became the king of Las Vegas. And Wayne approached him, and his brother was his manager at the time, and he said, would you manage me? And Jay Stream said, if you'll lose 30 pounds in 1 month, because he was heavy at the time. And he said, and he was going to go bankrupt, Wayne Newton. He said, no, you're not. He said, I'm going to give you an allowance of $500 a week, and if you'll do that, I'll manage you. And then what they did is they would put on a show every year for all the taxi cab drivers and their family, a meal show and him performing. And so if you were in Las Vegas and you asked a taxi driver, what's the best show in Las Vegas? What are they going to tell you? It's probably because it's the only one they saw. But even not, they saw it for free, and he did that. Eventually, some of the other artists caught on to what he was doing, but that's how he became the king. He sold out every show, and he was the most professional artist I ever worked with. He came in and did 12 vocals in one day. Nobody did that. He'd rehearse them, of course, but anyway, so he was fun. And then came the 80s. It was the most severe recession since World War II. The prime interest rate went up to 21.5%, and if you're on floating interest, you're in a lot of trouble. And we had floating interest on our recording studio, and so interest rates were running around 25%. Can you imagine what that did to your payments? And in 1981, we had a fire. And the fire burned the office section, but it got smoke damage in the control room, and we were out of commission for over a year. However, the songwriter advances continued on, and my expenses continued on. Everything continued on except the income. We had no income except from our music publishing. So Jimmy Johnson sent over 2 employees to help clean the equipment for no charge. He's the only one. In 1982, Alabama's unemployment was 10.9%, third worst in the United States. And we get the studio finished and we're ready, except nobody's signing new artists anymore. They're getting rid of all the artists who don't sell at least 100,000 copies. So we got this brand new, really cool studio, but no point in speculating, they're not signing them. So at the same time, and I'm going to straighten this one out too, do you remember Knight's desk at the Times Daily? Ben Knight, and he wrote this article. None of you old enough. Here's a really popular article, a column he wrote. And Ben had also won, I don't know what they win in newspapers, you know, but he did the Phoenix City story, if anybody remembers that, what a terrible place that was, and gambling down there and on and on and on. Then he got whatever you get for those kind of things. And he had been noticing how many artists were from Alabama. And he approached Lola Scobie and he said, there ought to be an Alabama Music Hall of Fame. We've got so many. He rattled off the Temptations and all these different ones, and Nat King Cole and Hank Williams, and you know. And so he approached her about it. At that same time, I was appointed the chairman of the Alabama Music Hall of Fame, and Lola was hired as the executive director. We raised money with Miller Beer, McDonald's. Every time you bought a can of Miller Beer, money go to the Alabama Music Hall of Fame. Same thing on McDonald's around the state. Randy Owen and I would get on the plane and would go try to make people aware of it, the Alabama Music Hall of Fame. And you'll see that picture of me with George Wallace and Bobby Denton. If it weren't for Bobby Denton, it wouldn't be out there. He was that pro having it done, and he knew what he was doing, I guess. Politics. I met in George Wallace's bedroom, and there's 3 or 4 of us, and he's there with the bar. You know, he had a bar because he'd already been wounded, you know, paralyzed at that time. And he was so sophisticated in telling us he wasn't too interested in the Alabama Music Hall of Fame at the time. But when we had the first induction banquet in 1985, he was there. I had to escort his wife. I remember that. I didn't like it because she didn't have a bodyguard with her. When in the music business, you get used to bodyguards, by the way. Most of those artists have them. You better be friends with them. That's how you communicate sometimes with the artist. And the Commodores got around George Wallace and sang to him, and it was just, you know, and who's the big country artist that George Jones was married to for a while? Tammy Wynette, Stand By Your Man. And I mean, so he got behind the Alabama Music Hall of Fame, or he gave his blessing, I should say. We did it with the Birmingham Music Club, which was a real sophisticated kind of thing in Birmingham where people are really into music, and they had Rolls Royces too. I was kind of surprised. So I remember George Lindsay saying, he looked out to everybody and said, "I didn't know there's that many rental tuxedos in Alabama." Any of you remember that they went? But then I co-produced 47 albums and 11 or 80 singles, which is equivalent to about 600 singles.